You're listening to the What's Happening podcast with Gary Watts.
Good afternoon. I'm really excited today to introduce you to Oscar and John Beasley. And we're here to talk about cycling, staying in shape, and doing all kinds of things. So good afternoon, Dr. Beasley.
Thank you, Gary.
How are you?
I'm quite well for my age.
Good. And you're what, 39?
No, let me think.
What are you?
Born in 1927.
27. So you're...
Can you subtract?
No, I don't know. You get 96?
5.
95.
Yeah, you're good, though.
I was close.
Yeah, that's close.
So anyway, we thought we'd tell us a little bit about how you got started in cycling and getting in shape. You're busy being a physician in internal medicine here in Iowa City, right?
Right.
For how many years?
43.
43 years you practiced medicine.
Right.
Wow. And then how did you get a bug, or can you tell us a little bit about your story of starting to ride your bike and getting in shape, and tell us that journey a little bit, could you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's a pleasure to talk about oneself. I was never an athlete. I didn't play any sports in high school or college. In fact, I played music. I was a trumpeter in the high school band and in the college band. And all I did was play tennis with my friends. No running, no jogging, nothing really in the way of a disciplined exercise program. But along came the Arabs in 1973, at which time I was busy in a private practice of internal medicine in Iowa City. And those of you who are old enough to remember those years, you couldn't buy gasoline on Sunday morning for love nor money, and the price went sky high. One of my medical clinic partners lived near me, Dr. Carl Larson, and he said to me, they called me OC in those days, OC, why don't we just ride bicycles to work? I said, Carl, I'm 45 years old. He said, you're not too old, which of course pleased me. But that was the beginning. I took that brand new, unused 3-speed Schwinn down off of the hooks in the garage, wiped the dust off, pumped up the tires, and to my surprise, rode it all the way a mile and a half to Mercy Hospital. And I'm so proud of my achievement that I had to tell my friends about it. That was the beginning. And thereafter, Carl and I regularly rode to work, which was to Mercy in the morning, and from after making rounds, we went to our office in Towncrest on the east side of town. And that's how I got started.
Wow, so 1973,
1973.
oil crisis. Was gas, like, I kind of remember this. I was just finishing high school, 28 cents a gallon. It went to like 50 or 75 cents, didn't it?
Quadrupled.
Yes. Yeah, or a buck. And then I remember waiting in line, and that wasn't any fun, but I do remember the crisis. So you started riding. So how did you get there from where you are now? I know you got a lot of things, a lot of rides, and a lot of things we can talk about with your son, John. But so you went a mile or two, and then you just keep building that up. How did you grow that cycling experience?
Right. Well, I purchased a magazine. In fact, I subscribed to it. Bicycling is the title of the magazine. I believe it's still published. And the first issue that I got featured a man who was 70 years old they published his diary. He had ridden from his home in California to Quebec City, 3,400 miles in 34 days. And again, I repeat myself, age 70. I was amazed that a man of that age could ride 100 miles an hour over the mountains and that great distance.
Yeah.
So I had to have a 10-speed. We didn't call them derailer bikes in those. We called them 10-speeds. And eventually, our local dealer, the Schwinn dealer, I think with pressure from Schwinn in Chicago, took on and began selling 10-speed bikes. And when I got one of those, I was amazed how much better it was than the 3-speed. And I started leaving home. I ride over to One of my first rides was a ride to Davenport, and my wife drove over and brought me back. I didn't ride both ways, but it built up from there.
So you've been riding ever since, right?
I extended it, and particularly after reading about the 70-year-old, I started taking longer rides. And then after 2 years, I decided to make a solo ride to my hometown, which is Paducah, Kentucky, 456 miles from Iowa City, and I made it in 4 days.
Wow. Over 100 miles a day, right?
Over 100 miles a day.
Right. Where'd you stay on the road? Or
I never was a tent
camp?
sleeper. I always had a motel.
to a motel?
Only once did I stay in a tent at night. I rode a lot of miles and a lot of places, but I always wanted a bed at night.
And you went back to Paducah. Was that your class reunion, or what were you
No,
doing?
it wasn't anything particular. It was just a good, beautiful fall day here with a nice tailwind from the northwest that helped me go south.
Great, great. Well, tell us about, I know you and your son John have been on a lot of trips, and tell us about, maybe if you'd like, what your most memorable trips were riding a bike. If you got some ideas, we got some things on the screen too we could pull up, but what are some of your thoughts?
Well,
You've been all over the world riding, haven't you?
I've been all over the Western world. I've not been
Western.
to Asia
Okay.
nor South America. But I'm glad you brought up John. He, in his early 20s, we did a number of trips together. And the best trip I've ever taken anywhere from the standpoint of pleasure was the California coast. And in 1984, we were joined by Andy Pirro, a good friend of John's.
Right.
We flew to San Francisco, and we rode the famous California State Highway 1 from San Francisco to L.A. 500 miles, 5 days.
Wow.
And it was beautiful, as well as a great pleasure to ride.
That's a Big Sur, isn't it? Is that what
We
they call it?
passed Big Sur,
Yeah.
as well as Monterey Bay and the famous golf course there, whose name escapes me right at
Pebble
the
Beach?
Pebble Beach,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
We did a number of other trips subsequently. Andy was on them too. My daughter Julie drove us up to Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is not far from what's the northernmost city in Minnesota?
International Falls?
International Falls.
Yeah.
And we rode back from Thunder Bay to Iowa City. Did that in approximately 5 days.
Wow.
And then John and I alone, without Andy, we rode to my alma mater, which was the University of Kentucky, by way of Bloomington, where the Indiana University is located. And I visited a cousin of mine there, whom I'd not seen for many years, and again, Julie drove down and brought us back in the car. There were other rides, Door County back to Iowa City, and I guess that's all I remember of when John was in his early 20s and before he was married to Beth.
So can you tell us a little bit, you're doing these rides, give us some idea of the people you met and some of your experiences. And, you're riding out on the road. I'm sure it's fairly dangerous, and I'm sure you got a lot of things that happened and memorable moments.
I'm glad you asked that. I continually hear about bad treatment of cyclists,
Yeah.
cursing, people shouting at you. I've had very little of that. I remember a couple of instances, but in general, I've been treated quite well. I don't think I've never been threatened to be run over, but
Right.
a couple of times people rolled down the window. And I remember as I was going to Boston one time, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, and somebody rolled a window down and said, "You're going to die." it kind of sunk in for a moment. And, you know, he could have been right because bicycling is dangerous.
Right.
I went to England early in my career. In 1977, I went over alone to the UK and flew to the northernmost airport in the UK, which was Wick in Scotland. And I rode back to London. Took me about, I forget now, 12 or 13 days. But I must say the English treated me great. They knew I was an American. They could tell instantaneously, but I was never abused by anyone, and by and large, I was treated royally.
Okay. You're on a different side of the road, right? When you're going,
I rode down close to the East Coast, but stayed away from the main roads.
That's good. So, what other memorable rides? Do you want to pull something up on the screen, talk about your rides, or not? Or, I think we got some pictures here.
Well,
maybe we could highlight where you're at. You're in Scotland here, this upper left, aren't you?
Yeah, there's that. Right. I put that camera on a tripod and took my own picture.
You're a young man there, Oscar. 1977, huh?
Yep.
How about that?
I was quite a little younger.
How was Scotland?
The UK in general was physically challenging. The hills were tough.
Yeah.
I had to occasionally push it up the hills.
Looks like you got everything in a pack there on your back saddles.
Yeah, on the back of the bike. I never wore a backpack any time at all.
Okay. Is that a 10-speed?
That was my second 10-speed, which I bought here in Iowa City, a yellow one. And I wound up giving that to a lovely family near London because they were so kind to me and put me up overnight for 2 or 3 days. And I said, keep it. I don't want to deal with the shipping and the boxing. And their son took over on it.
Great. White House, huh? So you went to D.C.
Yep. Those were in the early days of Ragbri, and I can't think of the famous...
Donald Call.
Yeah, Donald Call, writing for the Des Moines Register. He was then living in Washington, but still writing for the Register. And I just arrived at the White House there, and I called him up, and he met me the next morning, and we had a nice discussion, and he wrote me a column in the Des Moines Register.
Oh.
It appeared a week later.
This looks like on day 10 you have 916 miles. So that's how far it was to D.C.?
That's correct. What day is it? Day 10, yeah, slightly under 100 miles a day.
Yeah, great. And speaking of Call, this is the year of the 50th anniversary of Ragbri. It started in 1973, so it's the 50th year of Ragbri.
I think it's the most famous trans-state bike ride in the United States.
I agree.
Many states have adopted now.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin's done a great job, by the way. They've got a pedal. Wisconsin's very good.
Yeah, good. Okay, where are we at here? That's at 10-speed again.
That's I call my magnum opus, my most proud ride. I rode from L.A. to Kansas City, where my daughter lives, and I'm about halfway across Arizona when a German tourist and his wife stopped to chat. And I handed him my camera and said, "Take my picture, would you?" And he did.
It's an action photo. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I put it on my book.
Yeah, that's a great book. We'll get into that here shortly. I want you to talk about that.
Thank you.
Amazing. So where are we at here? What's this one?
That's the end of my long ride from L.A. to Kansas City, which I made in 17 days.
Wow.
And that averaged 100 miles a day, too. And I've lost 15 pounds weight on that trip.
Yeah, I was going to say, you look pretty slender there.
Yep.
So. Oh, here we go. That looks like John there to the right, and that's Pirro, Andy Pirro.
Right. We're going down Highway number 1 in California.
Yeah. Oh, that's cute.
And again, the most beautiful ride I've ever taken either in the States or in Europe.
And that was 500 miles, 100 miles a day, right?
Yes.
And they ended up in L.A.?
I started in L.A.
Started in L.A.
and came back to Kansas City.
Okay.
Left the car with my daughter in Kansas City.
Okay. Yeah, tell us about the dog. A lot of people in Iowa City remember you riding all over Iowa City with this dog. And
My wife, Betty, was very fond of Yorkies. This is a Yorkshire Terrier, and this is the second one we had. But she was so feisty that Betty kind of turned the dog over to me, and I loved her. And she liked to go with me anywhere, be it in the car or be it in the bike. She weighed 9 pounds. She fit perfectly into that nylon pannier, and I would regularly take her on rides around Iowa City and even short rides into the countryside. A reporter for the Cedar Rapids Gazette happened to see us, grabbed his camera, and shot this picture of us in 1999, and it subsequently appeared in the Gazette.
That's great. The dog's name was Sadie?
Sadie was the dog.
Sadie.
She lived 17 years.
Really? That's a long time for a dog, isn't it?
It's a long time for a dog.
Yeah. Here we are. Now, where are you at in Europe somewhere here, huh?
Okay, this is in Europe.
Sweden, looks like.
My riding career was divided into two halves, let's put it that way. The first half, I pretty much went alone or went with John or on my long tours. And then I quit and went into an old lady's job. I became a genealogist and wrote books on my family history because I had moved here from Kentucky and my kids knew nothing about my background. So I spent 10 years going through courthouses and graveyards, museums, libraries. And then prostate cancer struck me, and I got through that okay. And so I looked for something not quite as challenging.
Yeah.
So I learned about Elder Hostel. Elder Hostel, to my surprise, not only put out tours, but they put out bike tours based in the United States, but they put up tours all over the world. This is an Elder Hostel tour. By the way, they've changed the name now in modern days to Road Scholar, R-O-A-D, Scholar, getting away from the senile-sounding connotations of the Elder Hostel name. We toured Sweden, and those rides were really pretty easy. They were along rivers, not challenging, quite easy. And I wound up in Stockholm, and I took a few extra days, rented a bike, and I toured the city of Stockholm. The Scandinavians love bicycles, and they're very kind to cyclists. And so here I am, got somebody to snap a picture for me.
That's great.
And by this time, I'd learned how to use a digital camera, which was a new thing for me.
Okay.
Another Iowa medical school graduate is Dr. Streeter, believe it or not. Streeter's his first name, Shining, from Waterloo, Iowa. Like myself, Streeter became an internist, was trained here at Iowa, but he entered private practice not here, but in Rapid City, South Dakota. He was a little younger than I, but I learned about him. I won't go into the detail on that one, but I heard where he was, and he said, "Come out here and ride with me." So I did.
It's beautiful out there.
Drove out to, I can't think of that famous drugstore on the highway.
Wall Drug.
Right.
Wall
Thank you.
Drug, yeah.
Yeah. Met him there. He bought 6 or 7 of his friends from Rapid City there, and we all toured the Badlands. And then we went back into Rapid City and went to Mount Rushmore and various sites there. He had lots of doctor friends and nurses and technicians from the hospital, and so we had a great time with people who could talk my own language.
Did you go through
Strader's a great guy. He's crippled up now with peripheral neuritis, but I still hear from him.
Did you ride through the Black Hills too, or just the Badlands? You remember?
We did a little of the Black Hills around Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
Did several one-day tours, he and I together.
It's beautiful country.
Right.
So, okay, here we go. Pretty tree.
Yeah. Another important phase in my bicycling life was to make friends with a group out of Baltimore. They made their living at it. And from that group, about 9 of us seemed to find to like each other, and we formed our own subgroup. And we went from each other's hometown a week at a time, moving around the country. This happens to be Vicki Curran from right here in Iowa City with me in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. But the other members were from Sarasota, Florida, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 2 from Portland, Oregon, and a very able lady named Bonnie Berg from western Minnesota, Otter Tail Creek Lake, I think it's called. But over the teens, the 2010s, we went to each other's homes, spent a week or two touring that local area. And that was at the end of my career, pretty much. My last trip was to Las Vegas, where we bicycled in the national park, Zion National Park, and other parks there. And one of these ladies had a cottage in St. George where we put up and got together. And that's pretty much the end of my biking career was what you see there.
How old were you there?
We spent a week each place.
No, I mean, how old, what age were you in this picture?
There's the date up there on it.
2013.
That's early.
Yeah.
I had another 6 years after that.
Yeah, I had another 6 years.
Yeah, I was about, I'll tell you exactly, it was 10 years ago. I was
85.
I was 85 years old.
I got to keep saying these ages because there's a lot of people listening that are trying to think, hey, can I do this? Can I whatnot? And you're out there rolling around till you're 94.
I mean, Gary, that still surprises me that
you're
that
amazing.
People do that. Your book there is
we'll talk about that.
very
I mean,
good.
you're an inspiration to everybody because I mean, anybody can do it. Most people know how to ride a bike. They just don't get motivated to go out and do something. So hopefully you can motivate folks. Who's this group? Who's in this?
This is a part of that 9 subgroup that we formed. We were here in Iowa City, and then we rode out to the Amanas. That's at the Amanas.
Yeah.
And my friend on the far right is Dr. Streeter Shiner from Rapid City, South Dakota. He came out here, and he and his wife joined us for a few days.
Tell us a little bit on all your travels. I used to get the most fantastic pictures when you'd be on a ride, and you took a lot of pictures, right?
I love photography.
Yeah, and I mean the sunrise, sunsets, just trees, parks, whatever you're doing. They were amazing. You'd stop along a creek, you'd stop at a bridge. How did you get into that? What was that, a passion, or how did you get started in taking pictures?
Good question. It goes way back. I had an older cousin who gave me his darkroom equipment when I was still a teenager, and I made a few pictures with it. I wasn't very good at it, but when I graduated from college, I realized I didn't have any photographs of my last high school years or my college years, so I borrowed a twin lens reflex camera and started taking pictures. And then I got into med school right after that, and I was offered a ride to Ann Arbor by an upperclassman who was going to a fraternity convention. He said, "Do you want to go along, Beasley?" I said, "Yeah, I've never been to the North in my life." I got up to Ann Arbor, and I was absolutely amazed at the wealth displayed on that Ann Arbor campus. Those, of course, in the car days boom. I was used to the poverty of the University of Kentucky, and I was just amazed. So I went and bought a Brownie camera right then and there in Ann Arbor. Took a picture of that stadium with 105,000 seats in it, and of the fraternity houses, which were mansions by my standards. And thereafter, I just kept taking pictures regularly, and I've saved all of them up to this day. Every negative I took, every slide.
They're amazing. You got an amazing collection. So that's kind of a neat hobby, wasn't it?
I've enjoyed it. I still do. The biggest thing now with not riding is I don't have anything to take pictures of.
Generally, tell us, to listeners, on your last 20 years or so, annually, how many miles did you ride?
Everyone has that question, Gary, and I did keep track over the last decade. The most I think I rode in 1 year was 5,000 miles, but more typically it would be 3,000.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. That's a lot
Well, you
of
take 365 days
Right.
out of the year, and I rode every day I could.
Right. Wow. So, you figure you got, 225 days to ride?
Yeah.
That isn't in the middle of winter?
Bad weather would keep you.
Right. So when you hit an average ride, you were riding, 60, 70, 80, 90 miles a day?
It certainly tapered with the years. In my last years, which incidentally ended 10 months ago when I fell and broke some ribs.
Uh-huh.
Until then, I was really feeling my age, and a 20-mile ride tired me.
Right.
But I did achieve one thing. I rode my birthday in miles on my 90th birthday.
Wow.
And I had done that all previous years. Every year, just at or before my birthday, I would ride that number of miles in years.
So you gave yourself a birthday gift, right?
Yeah.
90 miles at 90. I mean, I hope people are listening to this. So
I didn't quite make it to, I'm sorry, my memories get a little short. The town on the Mississippi River, southeast of here,
Keokuk, Fort Madison,
north of there.
Columbus Junction.
No, I'm sorry.
Wapello.
It escapes me now.
Wapello.
Wapello.
Yep.
Didn't quite make it.
Yep.
But it was 45 miles, so getting back made 90.
Right. So what's this fat tire, Oscar? What do we got going on here? Is that a restaurant?
I would inform anyone interested in traveling in Europe to and in cities in Europe, look up the Fat Tire Company, American-owned, simple bicycles, 20 people at a time. If you have a guide, or you can go on your own, which we did in Berlin here, but they treat you well, and so I, in my last years of European travel, I rode in London and in Berlin and in Paris by going to the Fat Tire Bicycle Company.
And then you just take off
Good
from
outfit.
there. Oh, good. There you go.
That's really the last picture of my bike riding before I fell and broke my ribs. That's I rode down to Hills, Iowa, which is a 20-mile ride, and
Right.
so some nice lady was walking by, and I said, "Say, would you take my picture for me?" And she did.
Yeah, good. So here you're 94 then,
I'm
right?
94 years old.
94. I just still got to ring a bell every time I say that. 94 still amazes me. So that's kind of your last cycling picture. Let's get into your books. I want to talk about your books. What motivated you to write the books? And tell us a little bit about that, what your motivation was and why, and maybe talk a little bit about your physiology of how it kept you in shape, kept your mind strong, and then how you kept going and how you felt by, you were on the go all the time on your bike. And for the last, 40, 50 years? Yeah. Probably 50 years. So,
Yes.
Which I think anybody listening would find that amazing. It's just unbelievable. So tell us about your book.
Well,
what they're
I
about.
had the usual courses in college of physiology and med school. They have a standard course on physiology.
Right.
And I used what I could from that, and then I purchased a book on exercise physiology. And this, of the two books I wrote, Volume 1 was about my early years and about the physiology of exercise.
Okay.
And I tried to incorporate material that the layman would understand about energy, watts, horsepower, etc. And I looked at it this way. I used to think horsepower was a fiction, that this was just an advertisement of automobiles to make people buy them because they were powerful. But it's not true. A horse can pull a 550-pound weight out of a well with a pulley attached and do that for hours on line. That is, he's not like a squint. He do that hours on time. One horsepower is that amount of effort. 550-pound pull on walking on level ground. And a horse, these are wild estimates, but a horse is around 1,500 pounds. Right. A man is, say, 150 pounds. So it's a 1 to 10 ratio. And pedaling a bike at 1/10 of a horsepower, 76 watts, will take you along on a level ground. Let's say there's no wind. There's no such thing as no wind, but let's say there is. At about 10 or 12 miles an hour on level ground. Of course, it's much more if you're going up a hill. That's right. But I incorporated the energy expenditure and secondarily the calories consumed into the physiology of exercise. It always kind of interested me, and it still does.
So if you read that, what will you find out? What would you?
Well,
can you show us the book? Can you hold that up
sure,
a little bit
for
us for the cameras here?
Yeah, it's somebody wrote me a note. I loaned it in the book. Yeah,
take that off. So this is volume 2, Bicycling.
Oh, I gave you the wrong one.
Yeah,
here,
let's do the first one.
Here's volume 1. Yeah, okay.
So if you haven't got that, you can get that anywhere, can't you?
Well, I've sold all these. I only had 100 copies.
Okay.
A few of these are left up at Prairie Lights Books.
Prairie Lights, okay. So your first book was A Lifelong Means of Staying Fit. So
right.
Tell us, I got the horsepower thing. I didn't realize it was that many pounds pulling up out of the well for a horse. But so tell us a little bit how you stay fit by riding a bike. And then also tell us a little bit about your diet.
Well, for years I was like everybody else who was very concerned about cholesterol. And I tried to follow the diet that we all were taught. That's become less important nowadays.
Right.
First of all, we were wrong about the close parallel between diet and cholesterol, and now we have the statin drugs, which very effectively lower them.
Right.
And so it's not a big issue like it was back in those days. But I did stay away from bacon eggs, which I loved in those days, and fried foods. But I was not a strict disciplinarian when it came to diet.
Right. Eggs aren't so bad anymore, are they?
I have them every morning.
Yeah, I was going to say, we kind of went away from that.
That's exactly right.
So when you went on a long ride, what did you eat? Or what did you just, nothing specific, or you just tried to have a balanced diet?
Exactly.
Okay. And you didn't have to worry about your weight when you rode so much, right? So...
Well, I managed to put a bit of a pot on here in my last years anyway.
You're allowed that now. You can have that.
That's the privileges of old age, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So in the book, you got a lifelong means of staying fit. And what other things would you want to share with in the book, Oscar? What else in the book? You got a lot of exercise physiology. It's kind of interesting when you get into the mechanics of a bike. Got a lot of cool pictures in here, too, that you took. Anything else you want to share about your book? You had some of your experiences where you'd ridden your bike, a lot of pictures, really nice.
Well, I hadn't thought about this till this moment, but many years ago, I had a gentleman come in for a routine annual physical examination.
Okay.
And he was healthy. He just wanted a physical. And in talking to him, he was older than I was. I found he was well-to-do. He could afford to travel, but everywhere he went, he played golf. I thought, this is kind of silly. You can play golf right here.
Right.
But the lesson I took out of this is when you go somewhere, when you travel, it's better to be a participant than to be merely an observer.
Right.
And the bicycle has provided me that participation in the photography.
Right.
And there's no better way to do photography of a city than on a bicycle. You're just the right speed. You can stop anywhere.
Right.
Ideal combination.
So it became your lifestyle, right? I mean, you were just...
Very much so.
I mean, if you weren't on your bike, weren't you probably a little depressed or going, hey, I got to get a ride in? Or you wanted to be out there, didn't you?
Exactly.
I mean, it just gets in your blood, right?
I quit going to football games because I didn't want to waste a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. They take a while. You start out in the morning and you're there all afternoon. I get it. So what would you tell? So then you had your second book. What motivated you to do the book number 2?
Well, this is I got done with my genealogy, and my prostate cancer was history, and I started going to Europe and using the elder hostel on frequent trips, and so it became a matter of touring with other people, group tours, which whereas this is mainly solo or with my son or his friends.
Okay.
And so these are long, tours in mainly the United States and Europe. Although one tour I think is worth a comment. I didn't think of earlier. I took an elder hostel course on art in Mexico City. But as always, I added on a few days at the end, and I flew down to Panama. And I hired a guy named, what was his name? Oh, it escapes me right now. Panama Pete. And Pete met me himself at the airport. Yeah. And we drove back to my hotel, and I said, Pete, I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to ride from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean in one day.
Wow.
He said, I'll make you a proposition you can't refuse. I said, what is it? I'll pick you up at your hotel in the morning. I'll drive you to the Atlantic coast, which is called Colon, C-O-L-O-N, pronounced Colon. And you and I will ride together across the isthmus.
Yeah.
And I'll have my driver stay behind us with flashing taillights for protection. Great. And I now know why the French failed to build the isthmus.
Yeah.
That mountain is something else.
Is it hilly, huh?
But we made it.
Good.
Left Colon at 8 o'clock in the morning. We pulled into the Pacific side at 2:30 in the afternoon. He had his office help out there, 2 beautiful Latin ladies holding up a big sign that said, Atlantic to Pacific in one day by bicycle.
Yeah. Initially, you'd think that's 3,500 miles. That might be a tough day, but it's just the isthmus, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
So in your book, it talks about activity that has no age limits. So tell people that, as a physician, I'm sure you saw many people that were overweight, many people that didn't really do any physical activity. And how did you, that creates a lot of diseases, diabetes, heart conditions, on and on and on. I'm sure you got a list. Well, what would you tell the younger crowd out there that's listening to this as far as just some advice over the years as not only riding your bike all over the place, but being a physician?
Well, of all the muscles you want to protect and develop, the most important one is your heart muscle, your myocardium.
Okay.
And aerobic exercise does that for you. And running, swimming, bicycling, all those things speed that heart up, demand its conditioning. And then the second thing that comes to mind is that so many people, including present company, are joggers. Unfortunately, so many of them develop something called degenerative arthritis of the knee joints. They either need knee joint replacement or they have to limp around, take medication.
Right.
The bicycle is relatively easy on the knee joint. I don't think that pedaling a bike is likely to cause degenerative arthritis. You may get it anyway, but the limiting factor with running is usually the knee joint.
Right.
Certainly, you're right about overweight, obesity, and the benefits of exercise in general on those conditions and their complications. I don't know that I push people to do it in my practice.
Right.
I supported it if it came up.
And also, you probably got a little bit to talk about your mental state when you're exercising. What happens?
Yeah,
you get into endorphins and all that stuff.
You're thinking all the time. You have nothing else to do, so you're thinking and planning and so on.
So you probably solve a lot of problems while you're riding your bike, right?
Yeah.
You had time to think about stuff.
You got plenty of time.
So, well, I brought a book here too, and I think we talked earlier before you came in today that you've read this book. It's called Younger Next Year. And it's something that I read about, 15, 20 years ago. Becky gave it to me, and I've never been the same since. But it's another great book. And tell us about the Iowa City connection here to this book with this. It's Chris Crowley, right?
Yes. Let me see that. Yeah. Mr. Crowley was a New York City attorney.
Uh-huh.
His doctor was Dr. Henry S. Lodge, who, like myself, was also a general internist, and they were friends. The doctor supplied the medical information and his own experiences in bicycling and exercise in general.
Right.
The writer, who's an excellent writer, by the way, was the lawyer, Mr. Crowley.
Crowley, right.
And here in Iowa City, one of our neighbors was Dr. Gerald Howe, who was with the Steinler Clinic.
Right.
His daughter and my daughters were good friends and rode horses together at Sugar Bottom Stables in Johnson County. Yeah. Turns out that Martha Howe, the daughter of Dr. Howe, married the son of the attorney, Mr. Crowley.
Huh.
And that's a connection that I've enjoyed knowing about. Incidentally, I'd like to tell you about my first experience with this book.
Yeah.
I was on a tour of France, riding a canal from Brent, Belgium, to Paris, and was talking to a man from Connecticut. And I was talking about exercise. And I drew him a graph on a paper napkin. I said, you think about people reaching their peak men and women at age 85, and then you think of it going steadily downhill till you're senile.
Right.
I don't think that's the case, I said. I think if you exercise regularly, yes, you'll decline, but very gradually. Only a slight decline until you reach advanced old age. Then you'll go down quickly and you'll die. He said, that's just what I read in this book. And he gave me the name of it.
It's interesting.
When I got home, he mailed me a copy of it. And I read every word of it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. You need to write one because it says 80 and beyond. You need to do 94 and beyond, so you could add to this. But the book was interesting to me because it was a physician and then one of his clients that came in, or patients.
Exactly.
And I think he was around 70, if I remember exactly.
That's correct.
Part of it. And I think he skied a lot. He might have swam. He did a lot of exercise. And I think that the doctor was just amazed at what kind of shape he was in. He kept asking, what are you doing? And what I'd heard before is, try to get 30 minutes a day in exercise, and that'll kind of keep you in shape. But I think as you learn by reading this, after you get over 50, you need more exercise. You need more like an hour a day, maybe even more than that, because your physiology changes, your bone structure. You would know that. And I thought even if you just go for a walk, even in like a bike, you said isn't going to pound on your joints as much as running and whatnot. But swimming's another good exercise, and I've had swimmers on the show.
Very good.
And I think the key to this is that don't slow down when you get older. It's almost like you need more activity. You need to speed up, kind of. Would you agree?
No, though I have no good grounds for disagreeing. I know in my own case I have reduced my time spent in diligent exercise over the years, and very much so in these last 5 years.
Right.
But I was always amazed at, and so were my friends, how much I accomplished in my 80s. It's not a bad decade.
Right. And you didn't really lose your shape, did you? Didn't you kind of keep it and hold it if you're riding
No,
three or four times a week?
I couldn't tell a lot of difference between the 70s and the 80s.
Why? So that helped you get through those age barriers, right?
I like to attribute my longevity and my currently relatively good health state
Right.
to my cycling.
Right. Well, that's amazing. So, anyway, if you get a chance to show the folks out in the audience here, this is an outstanding book. I don't care how old you are, you know, you're younger or older. It's just it's an interesting and it's well documented. And like for Henry Lodge and then Chris Crowley, who was 70 years old, and Dr. Lodge was 46. So it was just an amazing relationship between a physician and a patient. So it's a great book. It'll motivate you to get after it and do some exercise. So John, I haven't really talked to you much today. I've let your father do most of it. What do you have here for? I know you and your dad and Andy Pirro rode the Coast Road. And what other experiences do you have with your dad on a bike you'd like to share?
You know, I was keeping some. I don't know if I can hear well. I was keeping some notes here, and I wanted to follow up with Oscar on a couple of things here. I know you mentioned you've ridden in the United States, but is my recollection correct, Dad, that you've ridden the West Coast to the East Coast of the United States and the northern boundary to the New Orleans?
Yeah. Seattle to the tip of Florida, Los Angeles to Boston, and Ontario to New Orleans.
Okay. And you've also ridden Alaska.
Yeah.
And I kept my notes here. I had the United Kingdom, Sweden, France, Panama. Let's see, Berlin,
Italy, Spain,
Turkey,
Norway, Denmark, UK, Croatia, Poland. That's it.
and
Wow.
and you finally put one on your bucket list was to bike Berlin. You and your friends met in Berlin.
There we are. Fat Tire.
That's in Berlin.
Right.
Now, you know, Gary's talked to you about your bicycling, but my recollection, Dad, is you added something else to your exercise regime when you retired at 75 years of age, something that you never believed in before, weightlifting. And I recall you would say,
Thank you for mentioning that.
when my friends and I would lift weights, you would kind of scoff and say, that does you no good. You just want to have muscles and show off. But at 75, my understanding is you became a 3-day-a-week weight training person. And talk to Gary about your experiences with that and how you got into
I'm
that.
glad you brought that up. I had a patient that I come to consider my best friend, Ed Kotick, 2 years younger than I. He sought me out for routine health care. He just needed a doctor. He wasn't sick. And he invited me to go on bike rides with him. Some years later, I asked him, Ed, why did you choose me as your doctor? His response was, "You were the only one in the group who rode bicycles."
That's funny. That's a great.
But we rode together many times around the state of Iowa for the next almost 30 years. He's now quit too. Ed is well known in the musical circles of Iowa City. He was a musicologist at the University of Iowa for many years. That was his principal career. And then after his retirement, he continued to direct orchestras and other groups, both in Iowa City and at the Coralville Performing Arts Center in particular. Ed had been a disciplinarian. He rode his bike from his home on Muscatine Avenue, to the music school every day, including the winters, through the years. The day I retired was a Friday. I called Ed on the phone. I said, "Ed, on Monday morning, I'm going to get up and I don't know what to do. Can I go to the gym with you?" He said, "Sure." So I went to the gym. He had a typed, mimeographed list of exercises. And for the next 20 years, I went with Ed and subsequently Dr. Charles Hawtrey, a urologist at the university, and Dr. Jack Nothnagel, professor of Romance languages at the university. And we regularly went to a gym and spent an hour exercising every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
I remember you guys, Core Fitness,
Exactly.
just down from Southeast Junior High.
Right.
I remember you guys. That was great seeing you.
Thank you, John. I'd forgotten
And
it.
so those, what benefits did you realize from weightlifting that was a surprise to you?
Well, I found out that there are certain things I couldn't do. I couldn't do. I forget the name of the exercise where you put your hands on a bench and lift your weight 10 times. I couldn't even do that, but I got so I had enough strength that I could. I found there were muscles that were simply weak. I'd never developed them. I developed muscles that had no use from my bicycling, primarily my upper extremities. Incidentally, I still do some of those exercises in my apartment in my retirement home. I learned from that. I don't lift heavy weights anymore.
I remember, Dad, when you went to the gym the first time, the day after your retirement, and you the next day, as so many of us experienced, after you have lifted weights the first time, your muscles are all sore. And he says to me, "Gary," I'll clean up the language for the public, but he says, "God, I can barely walk up the stairs. My legs hurt so bad." He says, "My goodness," those are my words, not his, "I don't want to play ball for the Hawks. I just want to live a little longer." So the next day, true to Oscar form, he went to the public library, and the next day had all kinds of books spread out in front of him on weight training, taking notes and refining his process. Gary, a couple of thoughts on my memories of biking with Oscar and Andy Pirro were the small town cafes. Our routine, when I say our, Oscar set the agenda. We would get up as soon as the sun came up, so there was just enough light that we didn't have any lights on our bicycles. We just, so that somebody could see us. And we'd try to bike anywhere from 25 to 35 miles from our hotel to the next small town, and that's where we'd have breakfast. Now, we became very astute at finding the best breakfast spots. And Oscar's guidance in this point was, here's what we do, boys. When we get to the small town, we'll bike around, and then we're going to eat at the one where there's a big Cadillac parked out front, because the owner of the Cadillac probably owns the seed mill, the elevators, and he knows where the best spot is. So that's where we'd eat, right? So you can talk about disciplined diet and, watching the eggs and watching the bacon, and that makes for good broadcast. But I tell you what, all the trips I took with Oscar, there was absolutely no discipline when it came to eating. It was, Andy Peru and I would have 2 or 3 breakfasts when we sat down, all on Oscar's dollar. I didn't have any money. Peru, it was all bacon and eggs and pancakes. We got through the noon hour on Mountain Dew and Snickers candy bars. And then Oscar would treat us to the nicest restaurants we could find near our hotel. And one memorable one is on the way to Kentucky, Lexington. Oh, yeah. First day, Gary, it's just Oscar and I. We leave Iowa City, and the whole motivation of the bike ride was his idea. He saw the movie Breaking Away. And Oscar's family, when he was growing up, made gravestones, monuments. And as you remember in the movie Breaking Away, you had the kids who went to college in Bloomington, and you had the kids who lived in the community next door whose parents cut this limestone that the University of Indiana was made from. Well, Beasley Monument, Paducah, Kentucky, got a lot of their stone from Bedford, Indiana. So Oscar said, I want to go to my old University of Kentucky, but let's go through Bloomington because I want to see where they cut that stone. Okay? So you remember that, Dad?
Sure.
In the first day, he and I take off, Iowa City, through West Liberty, and he says to me, I want to pay for the hotel tonight and dinner, so let's stop at the nursing home. And I think he examined 3 or 4 patients. You borrowed a stethoscope and you went in and saw some people. That's the best ride day we had. 168 miles, fully packed gear. We ended up south of Peoria. Wow. But the next day, we followed that up with 135 miles. And we ended up right on the border of, I think it would be Illinois and Kentucky. And there was a hotel and a restaurant that we stayed at on a bluff overlooking the Ohio River.
Right.
The restaurant was on the top floor and all glassed in. We were hungry, right? We'd just done 300 and some miles in 2 days. And you remember this, Dad? They had a big chef, big man, and he had a thing of hamburger patties, chicken, ribs, and at the end, a big, huge, probably 3 or 4 gallons of barbecue sauce. And he said, what do you want? I'll take all. He'd grab it, he'd dunk it in the barbecue, put it on your plate. That was your dinner. And then they followed it up with peach cobbler. Oh, wow. Peach cobbler. So we slept well that night. But I think the cafes and the breakfast spots after a morning or day of exercise were a real highlight.
You could get away with that because think how many calories you're burning, 4,000 or 5,000 a day or more.
Exactly.
Probably more than that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most beautiful spots, and I never knew about it, even though I was raised in Kentucky, Madison, Indiana, on a bluff overlooking the Ohio River. That was a great ride.
And then, when Oscar says the best ride he ever did was that San Francisco to LAX, that, if you're going to pick one ride to do, that's the one to do. The traffic wasn't great. Everybody was on the interstate that ran parallel. But you picture this. You come out of the Big Sur region, and then as you come out and it starts to flatten out, you can see up in the distance the Hearst Castle. Mm. So, yeah, we made that ride in 5 days, but we spent a half a day or more at the Hearst Castle, the famous Hearst Castle. But, Anderson, California, where they claim to have invented a split pea soup, ham and split pea soup. San Luis Obispo, and then is it the Santa Monica Pier that you see in the movies? We
Right.
rode up there. I think we had breakfast in Malibu. And then Oscar found a path. We biked right to LAX, and Oscar went to the counter and said, "Any flights back to Cedar Rapids?" He said, "We just got one with a few seats, first class." Oscar said, "Put us on it." They took the pedals off our bikes, turned the handlebars sideways, and Oscar didn't because he was far too disciplined. So was Andy Pirro. But I ate fried chicken and drank beer all the way in that flight back to Cedar Rapids.
In first class.
In first class.
That's not a bad way to go.
As Oscar would say, that's living.
Yeah. That's good. Well, that's great. I got a lot of memories. So, Oscar, what would you tell the listeners if you had some advice of all your years in medicine and riding your bike and staying in shape and all the things you've done? What would be some things that you could highlight in your career and also cycling?
I think everyone listening who stayed with us this long agrees that exercise is a fundamental part of staying healthy. Cycling doesn't require any skills. I wasn't good at golf, tennis, and certainly not at sports like football and basketball. But anybody can ride a bicycle.
Right.
And you can do it till you're old, till you're very old. I'm an example of it.
94, right?
Yeah. And it's not traumatic. It's easy on your body. It doesn't tear up your knees. I say all of this fully recognizing that a lot of people in a year's time get killed by automobiles, usually. Occasionally there are other reasons, but most commonly from car traffic, because I personally do not like riding on anything other than paved roads, and I've refused to ride on gravel, although that's becoming very popular now
Right.
with wide tires. So anybody can do it. It's pleasant. It's relatively safe if you follow the rules, and I've been fortunate, never been hit. Some good, safe riders have been hit. I realize that. I can't give you the percentages of how many ride versus how many get hit. I don't know that, but certainly it's well known that there are risks involved here, serious risks.
But the benefit outweighs the risk, right?
I hope so. I believe so.
Just amazing.
I did it.
So that's great. Well, good advice. So as far as riding bikes, there's gravel bikes, there's fat tire bikes, there's mountain bikes. And then around Johnson County, Lynn County, the trails, up to Solon, Ely, on up to C Street and Cedar Rapids. We're going to get hooked up to Kent Park and go out west. So all the cities and municipalities around here are doing a great job for cyclists. In town in Iowa City, Coralville, they have bike lanes. So it's becoming a hugely popular, way more than in '73 when you started, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
There wasn't a lot of people out riding bikes then. I don't remember that. So
Portland taught me a lesson. I was given a upscale group tour of the coast of Oregon in 2003. The part I enjoyed most was not that coast ride, but an extra day that I had in Portland. The city is really bike friendly. I enjoyed it so much. When I got home, I immediately planned a trip to Chicago, a city that all my life I associated with danger, gangsters, criminals, and hazards in general. But I drove in on a Friday, took a hotel, and spent all day Saturday touring the city of Chicago, and I enjoyed it thoroughly and never had a problem.
great.
And from there on, I started doing cities. The last 20 years of my riding were largely in big cities. I did Minneapolis, New York City, Boston, Sweden, Berlin, London, Paris, et cetera, and it worked out fine.
So have you ever tallied up, if you were doing 4,000, 5,000 miles a year, 3,000, how many miles you've ridden since 73?
I haven't done that, Gary. Everyone asks that question. I haven't tried to do it.
Do you want to just throw a guess out here, just while we're having fun?
Take where I had those years I was writing the genealogy book, kind of knocked 10 years out of it. Although I rode around town and in Johnson County, but see how many decades.
200,000 miles?
I doubt it was that much.
But you were probably tickling it. You're getting close, I bet.
Well, I have to multiply it out. I haven't done that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What was the furthest you ever rode in one day? Do you remember?
He named it.
135?
168 miles
168.
What's the town south of Peoria? I can't think of it. It starts with a P. It won't come to you, but we made from Iowa City in the morning to the
South of Peoria.
starts. I can't think of the name of it.
It's a
Old
long
age
ways.
has taken away some of my memory.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. So, John, you have anything else to add as a wrap up here on your adventures with your dad?
Well, a reflection of him, but oftentimes people say to me, you're a bicyclist, and I say, no, I'm not a bicyclist. I ride 2 miles to work in the morning and 2 miles at home. You think I'm a bicyclist because my father's an Iowa City bicyclist icon,
Legend.
right?
Yeah.
He's a legend here.
Yeah, he is.
So it's not me, it's him, right?
You
It's
start
him.
bragging about how far you've ridden. Oh, I've ridden 2,000 miles, and then O's at 4,000 to 5,000. So that's always kind of funny. You got to be careful what you say out in
Yeah, I
public
mean, I
out
was
there.
thinking one day I had a good week. I thought I did a little extra biking, and I say I got 20 miles going to and from work, and I did an extra 8 on the weekend, so I was up to about 30. And I thought, that's pretty good. And I thought, wait a minute, Oscar's 93, and he's doing over 100 a week. I better step my game up here a little bit.
Well, it's been great. You guys, Oscar and John, I really appreciate your time. Oscar, it's a privilege. It's an honor to have you here. You're an inspiration for everybody. Everybody, that knows you. If you've been around Iowa City as long as I have, you've seen you on your bike. It certainly should motivate the younger crowd, and including the older crowd, to say, keep going, keep pushing. Try to get into some kind of an exercise routine. You certainly have done that. So I just wanted to say congratulations. Thanks again for coming on, and I appreciate your time.
Gary, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Great. Good. Thanks a lot. Good to see you, John.